Okay, it looks like our little clock is running. Let us get our light bulb on the road. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 22nd of June, 2026, in our ongoing year of Trumpian hysteria, doom, and impending mess. And of course, don't forget joytukenwordpress.com, the cute little website that has a whole bunch of stuff that's now getting to be like decades old, but still is virtuous and worthwhile and gives you a little peek into how my brain was running back before I got to be all a YouTube person. So we will proceed accordingly. Anyway, as you know, we have been going through our two versions of Dwayne Gish, the exciting little creationist who has been dead for quite a few years, who used to be super duper fantastically important in creationist apologetics, and for whom the term Gish Gallop is named. But in the years that have gone by, because so many people are paying attention to internet material, where they're riffing off of posts at ICR, AIG, CMI, and who knows what else, have diminished quite a bit. So old farts who still read books the way I do are being replaced by the internet trawlers, and Gish's material, although not invisible online, for all practical purposes, his major books are not easily accessible. So we're doing a source analysis to see what's in the books, how much is retained, everything that was in the original book with some minor little tiny tweaks, as we have been noticing along the way, are included in the new book. And then about maybe a third of the sources are newer material, although still so far ridiculous sparse on technical questions. An awful lot of having a little part two on a new creationist that I wasn't aware of beforehand. I kind of keep big dibs on this field, and so when somebody pops up whose name I don't already have somewhere in my reference bibliography, that intrigue gathers out of me. We stumbled onto him secondarily because we were happening to be listening to somebody that was talking about something that led into something else, which we'll be getting into. Anyway, Gish is continuing in this chapter. It's basically a philosophical essay as to why creationism is really wonderful and why evolution is philosophically defective and blah, blah, blah. It's the sort of material you'd find in Standard Creationism from Henry Morris and all the rest. But we're looking at the source data, not so much the apologetics level. And here he's kind of talking about the limits of heritability and all of that. And he's got a couple older works, including a peculiar one and a very peculiar one. The very peculiar one is William Tinkle's book on heredity. He cites in the 1978 version, the 1967 edition, and then adds on the 1970 edition in the 1995 one in a very curious little way. But fortunately, the 70 edition of the book is available online at archive.org, so I will be putting a link up. You can only borrow it. You can't download it, but nevertheless, you can go through the whole material if one is of a mind to do so. And what was intriguing is a second quote that is in the 1978 book is just a standalone to an older 1970 book. In the 1995 version, he slips in a little note that says, as cited by Tinkle 1970. So I have the sneaking suspicion that Gish in 1978 had both of those books, was getting that quote from the Tinkle 70 secondarily, but didn't really want to mention it, and then felt maybe semi-guilty about it in 1995 and decided to go ahead and reference it directly from or allude to Tinkle's referencing it in the next bunch. Now, Tinkle is intriguing. He's one of the founders of the Institute for Creation Research set and all that. He is also a creationist eugenicist, which might surprise an awful lot of modern creationists who would position themselves 8,000 miles away from eugenics. But Tinkle goes all the way back into like the 1920s, 1930s period. This 1970 book clearly indicates that he's aware of the fact that eugenics got kind of a bad rap in that Nazi period. And so he says, oh, bad, bad, naughty, naughty, so forth and so on. Curiously, eugenics is not a topic in either one of Gish's books, which is an intriguing detail. Eugenics and trying to lay it all at the blame of Darwinism is a trope that you still find with Jerry Bergman and also way obsessive over in the intelligent design movement with Richard Weicker. So most intriguing. And then along the way, just a minor little blip, which only comes up on like a couple pages, is that Tinkle is endorsing Marsh's baramins as having kinds above the species level. So this is, what, 20 some odd years before the baraminologist movement really kicks into high gear in the late 1990s, but it indicates that at the very least, Marsh's ideas are laying the groundwork for what eventually is going to bear fruit in the Ark Encounter, which we will have that chapter on their Ark Encounter list in the new book, which is clearly going with the family level unless they don't, meaning us. So we're still a kind at the species level, and then everything else is largely family. Although in the Marsh period and in this period that Tinkle is thinking of, they're not ready to slide all the way up to the family level. They're thinking at least above that to the generic and slightly higher level. But that became a necessity once you get down to trying to trim everything down for the Ark. So that's an indication of the evolutionary process that's taking place within young Earth creationism. Now, so I recommend, just to get a sense of where that 1970 brand of kind of generic creationism, Walter Lamberts wrote the introduction to the book, as well as another creationist who happens to have the same name as a non-creationist. It's a fairly common name. That gives you a sense of the dogmatic position that he's got, but it's not exactly a glut of technical literature. And although DNA and all that stuff is coming on scene, it's not terribly informative. And frankly, modern creationists of the Nathaniel Jensen crowd type have to basically wing it on their own in this area. So even though Tinkle and these other people technically have genetics degrees, trying to figure out how to warp the data field that they are not themselves generating typically has always been a problem for creationism, is not likely to go away anytime soon. Okay, now to our new creationist. And it's in a young Earth creationist context. I should point out that typically a mammoth number of scientists are slopping into my data field every week with all the technical papers that I'm dealing with. And it's easily 10, a dozen or so papers every week coming in just via PNAS Science and Nature and other material that I get following our various science groups, Erica and Dan and others that are alluding to things in our chat basis, because nobody could be able to pay attention to all the technical journals, because there are thousands of them. So it's helpful when you can rely upon people to kind of triage things in the same way that there will be very specific material that Joel Duff will take notice of. As it happens, Duff just did a piece on a new technical paper that relates to stromatolites and the like, and occurring as a result of this impact event in Korea, like I think 40,000 years ago, something like that. And it happened to be independently come upon by Jackson and I, and we're alluding to this as an interesting bit because stromatolites come up in relation to why creationism can't account for them properly in Rocks for Their Volume 2. Anyway, this particular creationist has come by a kind of a round-the-corner way. It's a chat that Marin had with Dan Stern Cardinale, which is a YouTube. I'll be putting the links up. And they did regarding an Adventist channel that featured Tim Standish, who I was aware of, already had him in my data field, who along the way is interviewing a new talking head, this guy, Ryan Hayes. And that brought me to his little niche in Adventism that had escaped my attention. He's kind of a fairly new player on the scene because the kind of material he's dealing with is basically within the last 10 years or so. Anyway, there's a 2022 piece that I'll be putting a link up to on using basically origins or busts for Adventist apologetics. And he's trawling a bunch of ideas like Michael Denton, Douglas Axe, and takes a little jab at climate change, but only in relationship to how fine-tuned gases in the atmosphere have to be. But what I thought was interesting to give this particular episode related to the origins or bust angle, and particularly how he was dealing with things like the Miller-Urey experiment, and in particular, a relatively new technical paper that Hayes and his co-author are just flat out misrepresenting. So we'll start with Miller-Urey. They either don't know or don't care to mention that the material that had been generated in the early Miller-Urey experiments have been reevaluated since then. And it's discovered that with modern analytical tools, a lot more amino acid stuff was being generated than they thought at the time, because their skill set wasn't able to deal with all of this stuff. But anyway, and there's a selectivity even to the papers that they are citing. So he's citing this 2016 paper by Walrab on chemical analysis of Miller-type complex prebiotic broth, part one. Not citing the part 2 by Scherer, which we'll also be putting the link to, so you can follow up on that. That part 2 one had found that, quote, in the Miller-Urey type experiment, a spontaneously forming oil-water interface offers the possibility of interfacial catalysis. So it was certainly not a problematic argument. And then we hit a real jackpot, which is this paper from 2021 by Criado and Reyes et al. We'll be having a link to the full text of the paper, which in my view is just wildly misrepresenting its significance. Now, Hayes and his co-author are declaring that it is, quote, in this experiment, amino acids were not produced in a Teflon plastic container, only in a glass container. This result means that the glass had to be in contact with the gases, greatly reducing the chances that the Miller-Urey experiment simulated anything useful in the past, unquote. Holy smokes, is that misunderstanding the point of the paper? The paper was about trying to work out these borosilicates, which happen to occur in glasses, with other mineral surfaces that were proposed to facilitate organic production. And it just happened to be that they're looking at the dynamics of how things interact with a thing you can measure, which is glass, to get a better sense of it. They weren't trying to suggest that you had to have glass in order to be able to do this thing. And since there was no glass at the beginning of life, therefore this was irrelevant to the Miller-Urey thing. That's spin that the creationists are trying to put on this, and it's clearly at odds with the actual content of the paper. Their paper had concluded, in fact, the importance of our results lies in the fact that, for the first time, the role of borosilicate has been experimentally demonstrated in a type of synthesis of the utmost relevance for the inorganic generation of organic compounds from scratch. The famous Miller-Urey synthesis triggered by sparking would be highly efficient at any place of the universe, provided a mineral surface is available, unquote. That's way different than the kind of spin that they're trying to put on it. And so what you can do is to compare the text of their argument with the material in that paper and see if you don't agree with me that, holy smokes, are they playing fast and loose. They've got practically a page of technical citations in their references. So it's not as though they're not trawling from a lot for a relatively short little article for this Adventist journal. And then there's a YouTube that I found that he was involved in from 2021. And it's a train wreck of familiar apologists. We've got Sal Cordova, we've got Rob Statler, But also we've got Cy Garta from the idea-ish end. So if you want to kind of be able to see Hayes in action in a video format, that's one you can take a look at. So there we go. I think that's an interesting little blip on the strain techniques that creationists deal with in trying to maneuver around data field or selectivity in data field. And since the origins or bust is one of the primary arguments in this area, couldn't pass it up. Happy, happy, joy, joy. Okay, so got in 15 minutes. I don't see anybody in the live stream there, so we don't have any questions or comments to deal with. Let me proceed to thank our patrons who have been sticking through thick and thin. Where are we? Get my little file open here and maneuver around to our share window. And hopefully there we go. Thanks everybody who has been able to keep up supporting the group all of this time. Our colleagues, researchers, assistant researchers, friends, and legacy patrons. It's a thing that couldn't do it without you every month. I'm just a Social Security guy with a little bit of trickles from the book royalties and the Patreon to keep things running, and local friends and others who muddle with me each day and week and month. So keeping at it, keeping at it, keeping at it. And bear in mind that I don't want anybody to be shelling out any scratch to the project if it is a financial problem at your end. As much as I appreciate everybody's bucks, nonetheless, we are well aware of the fact that train wrecks are impending, and got to keep your powder dry at all levels. Even as the algae grows in the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C. What a screwball situation that we've got going in here. Anyway, Jackson is going through my adjustments and additions to our Noah's Lost World chapter. He's going to be adding some new material and some comments on Alan Fiducia. We have such fun with Alan Fiducia. He just really is whipsawing around so many other material. The Fred Hoyle of bird evolution, as we like to call him. And I'm also continuing compressing down the cosmology chapter. I'll probably have to do a whole second pass once I get all of the other chapters tidied up, because I have a page limit structure that was determined by the first big book that was bumping up into our limit. And the reference bibliography is even heftier this time around. So I got to make sure that we target in so that the print version at least can run. We have more leeway in the electronic version, but it's going to be a mirror image of that, although it has to be a separate file because of the need to not split up info boxes and that in that version. And that means some of the pagination will be slightly different, and that means the indexing has to be done independently for the two versions. So that puts a little more headaches on my end of the fence, but you take your chances and you do it as you should. So anyway, still not seeing anybody in the live stream, so we'll presume that people will be waking up after our long holiday and taking a glance at the show. Let me get our advert for Rocks Were There looming. Waiting for my little thing to up here at my end. And then window up here. Come on, little mouse. There you go. No one is ever going to accuse Evolution Hour of being elaborate visuals, but nevertheless, it's also deliciously cheap to do at my end, as opposed to having to pay a big service for things that can sometimes be just as dicey as doing it for free. And there is our sharing. Um, Jackson and I, of course, are stupendously proud of the first volume, and we're up in the ante for the second volume. There will be so much in there that will be completely fresh. The original book was planned as just a single book, and it expanded to the point where we realized that we couldn't possibly do it in a single volume. And then there's so much new material in the cosmology department. So many creationists keep blither blathering on in the years since there. The intelligent design movement refuses to shut up. And so you've got them digging their holes ever deeper. And we want to make sure that the work is as up to date, both on the technical literature side and the issues, as well as the material from the anti evolution side, so that you have as much ammo as possible with a very thoroughly structured index so you can find blips of information quickly and so forth on a major scale that is kind of the counterpart with much more detail and interactivity via the indexing than that old classic Arthur Strahler book from way back in the 1980s that was just dealing with young earth creationism. So although the book is ostensibly an assault on the Answers in Genesis worldview, boy, as you'll be seeing with Gunter Beckley and all the stuff on the Cambrian explosion, there's a hell of a lot of mess from the intelligent design movement that needs to be covered as well, because methodologically they're just as inept as what you find over in young earth creationism. In some respects, then, the old earth creationist camp, just by virtue of them being more circumspect about a lot, aren't cropping up nearly as often as either one of those camps. But the only time the old earth creationists are revving up is if they're trying to do some things for doctrinal reasons. Ross is coming up because of the attempts to try to pigeonhole the flood at anywhere from 30 to 90,000 years, which is pretty vague, as well as the attempt to wriggle around the day 4 problem, which is in a major section on the whole how come anybody is trying to take Genesis seriously as a cosmological statement? Nope, sorry. It screws up young earth creationists for them taking day 4 literally, and it screws up old earth creationists for trying to figure out how any of these days can, in any sense, mean anything. And the fact that so few of them have even tried and all of them disagree with one another is of detail that, again, we feel a need to be documenting in full bore. So anyway, there we are. We're not quite at a half an hour, so that'll have to deal with on that. Again, we'll be sticking all the links in on that front. Everybody stay super duper safe. There's tumultuous weather and droughts and heat waves and rainstorms and mess going on, in addition to the blatant incompetence and bluffing of the Trump administration, trying to pretend their Iranian war that is all over and hasn't been, and this Rolodex of supposed agreements that they keep coming up with and yet not coming up with it, and the blame games going on in the in-house fighting between J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio on that are weird and pathetic, but don't blame me. I voted for Harris. It's not my fault. The iniquity shall be on others' shoulders. So anyway, everybody stay super duper safe. Watch out for the wooden penguins, especially the ones armed with lasers. And we shall be seeing you all next week when there will be another Luskin show where, spoiler alert, I'm not anticipating anything helping their argument, but we will be continuing to plow through all the little brigade. And we're almost to the end of this particular chapter of Gish. Eventually, we're going to be able to slide into things that are purporting to be discussing actual paleontology, because this is the fossils say no, fossils still say no. So just how many fossils and how accurate or detailed was the 1978 game? And more importantly, how evasive or not is the 1995 version? I've already bumped into that in my own research going back for decades on dinosaurs and the reptile-mammal transition. And spoiler alert, he ain't doing well. But this will be a chance to get into the other areas, the invertebrates and amphibians, and a lot of these little sidebar things that didn't occupy quite my same attention. But by going through it at a full source analysis level, we get to dive deeper into things like that and try to see where exactly the argument stands on the technical side long after Gish has met his reward. This is a thing which I'm not trying to prejudge, so we'll just be going through it. Plus, often you can see things coming at things fresh in a way that you wouldn't the first time around. Some of my neatest bits, which ended up in Evolution Slam Dunk from Dwayne Gish, coming at this issue again fresh. And also the fact that by the time we were doing that book, an awful lot of the technical material had become available open access. So I was able to fact check background material, or in some cases written off to people to help me on these things. Professor Lowe at Carnegie, for example, graciously supplied me with a bunch of technical papers, which at the time I didn't have direct access to, which allowed me to do a detailed breakdown of the Woodmer cladistic analysis. And we'll be having some more, because the same bad games that Woodmer was doing in Evolution Slam Dunk on the reptile mammal transition, he's trying to do the same shtick with whales and the like that we'll be going into in the new book. So anyway, that kind of puts everything up to speed. Again, stay super duper safe, careful, and we will be seeing all you kids next week. We are ending Le Stream.